The following is a short summary of the cash flow analysis that was done for 10 years since 2007 to 2017 using the annual reports of the Government Employee Pension Fund. Before we go into the detailed calculations, it's worthwhile for us to stop just with regards to the Government Employee Pension Fund's vision, which is to be a global leader. And then the second thing that's important is the mission, which includes one particular item which we are interested in, and that's to ensure the sustainability of the fund. Our analysis takes place over a span of 10 years from 2008 to 2017, and we basically use the cash flow statements that we took out of the annual reports for those years. And by and large, what our research actually shows, or the analysis shows, is there's a direct impact that the contributions have, the contribution level have on new investments, and through that it also impacts significantly the funding levels. Now, in short, to summarize the cash flow thing for the fund is effectively to pay benefits. Okay, the pension fund needs cash. This they get from inflows of cash from contributions, and as well as money that's invested, interest and dividends that's received. Then in the past, these two items, basically the contributions was always more than the benefits. That was up until 2014. If you can look at the table, you'll see that with regards to the level of investments, that tapers down from 2014 to 2015. 2014 it was 44 billion, and then in 2015 it's 21 billion. So it's basically a drop by half. And this sort of alerted us to the fact that the contribution levels and its relationship with benefits has got a massive impact on the growth of the fund. So, and that we'll look at it in the remainder of the slides and also the research. Okay, when we compare the benefits against the contributions, just those two elements, we can actually see that over the 10 years how the situation has reversed. Here from 2015 onwards, that's the circle bit where the benefits exceeds the contributions. Now the contribution shortfall for those 3 years is already 64 billion. So I'll repeat, 64 billion. If you compare that to Steinhoff, that's about 3 Steinhoffs we're sitting with there. Then in order to cover for this shortfall, whereas in the past the contributions covered the benefits, that shortfall needs to come from some place, and that some place is the return on investments, the interest and the dividends that previously could just be sent through to the Public Investment Commissioner for reinvestment, but now it had to make up this 64 billion shortfall before any new investments can actually be made. Now this graph nicely shows you the switch over of what happens to the new investments. The green line is the new investments, and as you can see, it drops dramatically here in 2014. It crosses over. The reddish line represents the benefits. As you can see, it escalates past the contributions, and it's almost like a mirror image between the benefits that exceeds the contribution and the new investments at the bottom. What we then did was to go and have a look at what the independent expert said, and the valuator as well as the auditors basically indicated and calculated that the employer contributions needs to be increased, and they've calculated it as part of the valuation report. Now, the actual contribution rates used is not high enough according to the actuary. They've calculated the difference, and I think the shortfall primarily comes from the staff that services or so-called services, but the other members as well. There's the shortfall of the contribution rates. Now, notwithstanding that the auditor agreed with the recommendation of the valuator that the contribution levels are too low, the board has not done anything about this. And then if we go look at the Government Employee Pension Fund law, and specifically Rule 4190, which indicates that the trustees must take reasonable steps to ensure that the interests of the members are protected. Now, if we follow this, we say, well, okay, what's the interest of the members? Now, for pensioners specifically, it relates to the inflation increases annually. The pension fund itself, the rules guarantee 75% of the inflation rate at a particular date. But the extra little bit, the 25% that makes up to 100, is basically the risk portion that sits with pensioners. And what we know is if the long-term funding level is not adequate, because the long-term funding level actually incorporates some recommended reserves, contingencies reserve, and all investment returns are below inflation, that may actually impact the granting of 100% inflation increase to pensioners. So let's look at the action by the Board of Trustees, whether it's first of all in the interest of the fund, and if it's in the interest of members and pensioners particularly. So let's start with the fund. Rule 7.2 indicates that the contribution rates should be determined with regards to the recommendations made by the actuary. We've seen that the actuary recommended certain rates, the auditors agreed with them, and notwithstanding this, the board has decided not to increase the contribution rates. Then if we go further and we have a look at Rule 7.2 that states further that the fund should meet its obligations at all times. Now, I've highlighted that at all times because at all times means today, tomorrow, next year, the following 10 years, 30 years, 40 years. So in other words, it's short-term, medium-term, long-term. And my emphasis is on the long-term funding level. Then with regards to all this, I'm asking the question, based on this argument, did the board in actual fact act in compliance with the particular law by not insisting on higher contribution rates? That's from the SA government. Now, I go further to say, well, even if the board, and I'm pretty sure they did this, was to have a look at the legal side of things, and they got a legal opinion most probably somewhere. I'm just going one step further and say, well, okay, even if you go and you say you do have a legal opinion that in terms of the fund you do not really have to increase contribution levels, I'm saying, is what you are doing in the best interest of the members? And Rule 4119A basically deals with that. Okay, the Government Employee Pension Fund investment policy statement states in paragraph 11, and it clarifies who's actually carrying risk at what stage of the membership of the fund. And effectively what this paragraph states and confirms is that for specifically pensioners, is once people go on pension, they actually are exposed to investment risk. And they clarify by saying, to the extent that such risks may adversely impact the fund's ability to afford pension increases above the minimum set out in the pension increase policy. Now, the minimum is the 75% of the inflation, which I referred to previously. Now, like any risk, we need to determine what is the risk and what's the mitigating factors. And I say here is how real is this investment risk? And it's quite real because, I mean, in the annual report, which there's an extract of, where the PEO actually is on the record to state that investment returns below the inflation rate could impact negatively on the fund's objective of granting full inflationary increases to pensioners. So, but what we have now is, and this is my comment, is to say that, you know, what we have here is a case where the inaction of the trustees basically reduces in the first instance the amount of investments held. This in turn reduces the quantum of investment income regardless of the investment rate. And we'll deal with the rate decision just now. When we look at the investment returns that's below inflation, we notice that the rate of returns, or we should state that the rate of return is dependent on quality of investments. The total amount of the returns are again dependent on the volume of investments and multiplied by the rate. The target rate of returns, as stated in the investment policy statement, is a bit different from what they've used in the annual report for 2017. And then the main issue relates to the targets or the benchmarks that's set every year for the Public Investment Commissioner to chase. Now in 2017, we've picked up that those targets were below inflation. The problem is we do not see these mandates that gets given to the PIC. We just basically see what's in the annual report. Now to continue, when we reviewed the annual report for 2017, the PO in his report stated that for the 1 year, the return on investments was 4.3%, and that outperformed the strategic benchmark that they on themselves have set for the PIC of 3.7%. Now, as indicated in the finding on the slide, is this benchmark is below inflation to start off with, and then secondly, it's below the framework within the investment policy statement. Now, the answer of the PO, he sort of implies that I've used the CPI to compare, but in fact, it was his comment in the annual report to which I was just responding and indicating that the claim that they made of outperforming this very low strategic benchmark is creating basically a false positive. And then my final comment is on this particular thing is the benchmark can only be legitimate if it falls within the framework of the policy. And the policy is calculated these benchmarks to ensure the long-term sustainability and growth of the fund. So the Board of Trustees, by means of reducing that rate, is not keeping to the policy. So in the end, we need to have a look at the investment policy statement, and specifically paragraph 13.8. Now, to be honest, when I read this thing, it really confused me totally. But if I do understand what it says, it's based on certain valuation assumptions. The key issue is for the fund to earn a real return in relation to inflation of at least 4.5%. So when we look at that, it's quite clear that the benchmarks that they've set specifically for 2017 is nowhere near this particular benchmark. It's CPI plus 4.5, and the actual return is not even close to CPI. So if they continue with this, the fund is really going to go backwards. I then looked at what the chairperson in her review actually said, and from a review, basically there are two sections which I've highlighted on the slide. The one deals with the fact that the weak economic growth is basically the cause for the subdued investment performance for the year and also the returns. And then the chairperson indicates that this may impact the funding level. And it's the word they use is may. So there's no clarity according to the chairperson. And then the second part is the increase in investment values is mainly due to additional investments. That's for 2017. So what she's saying is there's not been the real capital growth of the underlying investments, and that's why year on year there's not been a massive investment growth uh, for the fund. So what we did was to test this statements against the analysis that was performed. So when we test the validity of the chairperson statement, so let's start with the first issue, the funding level comment. Basically, the 2016 actuarial report already indicated the funding levels has deteriorated, both the minimum and the long-term funding levels has deteriorated. The next actuarial valuation is in 2018, and basically the auditors also agreed that the contribution shortfall impacts the funding levels, and we've seen it's actually quite significant. The auditors also regard the funding level as a key audit matter. The subdued investment performances is not only the result of the weak economy. Yes, the weak economy played a role, but by and large, the non-contributions, the lower contribution level, also contributed. Then thirdly, the increase in the investment values for 2017, that may be very well so that the growth from 2016 to 17 um, is related to new investments and basically very little capital growth. That may be so. But as we've seen, the new investments and the quantum of it is basically the result of decisions pertaining to contributions, which is in fact under the control of the Board of Trustees. It's got nothing to do with the economy. So therefore, to put all the blame on the economy is not actually correct. And then all these things have impact on the funding levels, specifically on the contingency reserves, which basically half of it is uh, related to solvency issues, and the other half is to ensure 100% CPI increases. Now, the reserves has deteriorated by a massive 135 billion in 2 years between the actuarial valuations of 2014 and 2016. So let's focus on the contingency reserves and the calculation. Um, as can be seen here, that's the 135 billion. First of all, the recommended reserves are calculated by the actuary, and as you see from 2010 to 2016, it increases, and there are reasons for it. It's the same with the liabilities, that also increases over time. So the recommended reserves between 2010 and 2016 has basically doubled. 2016 at 647 billion, and then 2010 it was 344 billion. The actual contingency reserve is the amount that can actually be afforded. And that's basically the difference between the actual investments at the end of the year and the level to which it exceeds the best estimated liabilities as calculated by the actuary. And as you can see, in 2010 there was 64 billion that could be afforded. 2012, 27, then a nice jump to 252 in 2014. And in 2016, the amount that could be held was 222. But as you can see, is for you to keep pace with the growth of the reserves, these contingency reserves also needs to increase. So, and then it's a basic sum to calculate the reserve shortfall between this evaluation and the prior one. Now, and that's how we got to the 135 billion. Okay, so now let's have a look at the contribution shortfall and the calculation thereof. In the previous slide, we basically calculated or showed up the difference between the contributions and the benefits. Here we actually put it all in a table, and we actually show that for the 3 years, the contributions was 185 billion. The benefits over the same period paid out was 249. And the difference, or the shortfall, is 64 billion. You can see that it basically, over the 3 years, it averages around about 20 billion, give or take a billion or two. Right, so now we've got the 64 billion, and perhaps just to have a close look at what that actually would mean is we had a look at the investments over the 10 years, and what I just did was a basic calculation, no fancy time value of time value of money. Basically, in the end, the amount that we regard as new investments was 400 odd billion. Now, in a 10-year period, that amount basically doubles. That's what it does, that particular amount. In new investments, it doubles. And so therefore, if we add that 64 billion, in other words, if the government paid the extra contributions, the total new investments over the total 10-year period would have been 500 billion. Right, so this is quite a big amount. And what we also show, and it's a very basic calculation, and we shouldn't forget that a lot of the capital growth basically gets taken out during the 10-year period by means of the sale of investments. So there are cases where these things are actually liquidated through the income statement. So by and large, the new investments has got a massive impact on the growth of the fund, as this graph actually shows. Okay, following the analysis and all the information that preceded this slide, there's some questions that we need to consider pertaining to the specific item of the contributions. And what I say is we need to have a look at the board not increasing contributions, and we need to determine whether that increases or decreases investment risk for pensioners. By not increasing contribution, are we saying the funding levels are positively or negatively impacted? By not increasing contributions, is the affordability of contingency reserve positively or negatively impacted? By not increasing contributions, are the trustees actually acting in the best interest of the members? Or is this a decision that's in the best interest of the employer? Now, this is a very important question because it deals with the issue of conflict of interest, which the trustees are supposed to not to have, regardless of how they appointed, etc. So this is a very important question. Then another one is I say, does the chairperson of the board comments in that annual report indicate an acceptance of accountability, or is it more a case of blame shifting? I also end up this slide by saying where you can actually find the annual report for 2017. So for you to go and have a look and confirm for yourself what the chairperson has said, and also the PEO and all the financial information. Right, in summary, what we need to have a look at, and this is not a comprehensive list, but this is just the key elements according to me. We need to have a look at the board decisions that needs a little bit closer scrutiny. First one that we've identified is the contributions, which are not increased, notwithstanding all the recommendation by the independent parties. Second one is the investment return benchmark targets, which is set for the PIC, which is lower than those in the policy as well as inflation. And then I tie this back to when we started this whole presentation. I say, do these actions promote sustainability of the fund? Remember, we looked at the Government Employee Pension Fund's mission. And then the last question, basically, I say, does it take the Government Employee Pension Fund closer to its stated vision of being a global leader? So all this I tie back to the vision and mission statement of the Government Employee Pension Fund. We've come to the end of the presentation. If you guys have any additional questions, please send them through to Errol. You can forward them to me. I'll do my best to answer them. The chances are good if you ask a nice question, we can actually add it to the information that we have, and we can update the research as well as the documentation to incorporate with whatever you ask us. So thanks for your time. All the best for the remainder of the session. Thank you so much.